Imagine the situation of David, a 15-year-old kid growing up in Southern California. You're already typically confused because, well, you're 15. You're an only child. Mom and dad have divorced, resulting in a joint custody situation, which of course adds to your confusion. Mom is dating again, and her current boyfriend doesn't really seem to be a good dude. Your only solace is music. Then, one morning in late February 1983, you're sick in bed and home from school. Mom is out for a morning jog. That's when you hear someone breaking into the house. When you get up to look, you're confronted by someone pointing a gun at you, by someone you know. You're handcuffed and locked in the bathroom. When his mom got home, she had an argument with the gunman. Before he took off, the guy let Dave out of the bathroom and told him, "Don't say anything, keep your mouth shut, or else." And then he left. Young Dave was terrified, so he kept his mouth shut. But that wasn't the end of it, though. A week later, this same guy returned to the house and shot David's mom and her best friend dead. Then he went on the lam for nearly a decade. The trauma that Dave experienced was unimaginable. Even though he grew up to be the guitarist for Jane's Addiction, one of the most iconic alt-rock bands of the late 80s and 90s, processing what happened that day in February 1983 sticks with him to this day. I'm Alan Cross, and this is episode 49 of Uncharted Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry. And this time, it's all about Dave Navarro and his witness to murder.
Señores y señoras, nosotros tenemos más influencia con sus hijos que tú tienes, pero los queremos. Creado y regado de Los Ángeles, Juana's Adicción.
Stop from Jane's Addiction, featuring guitarist Dave Navarro. And on this episode, we're going to explore the murder of his mother, the search for the killer, and the lingering trauma that Dave is still processing today. Let's begin by revisiting the scene of the crime. Michael David Navarro was born in Santa Monica to Connie Hopkins and James Navarro, whom everybody called Mike. Dad worked as a big-time executive in the advertising world. Mom was an actress and model, and for a time had a gig on the old TV shows Truth or Consequences and The Price is Right, pointing at prizes. That's how she met Mike. The office of her modeling agent and Mike's ad office were in the same building. She also appeared in some Doris Day commercials and a bunch of TV commercials. Alberto VO5 Hairspray was one of them. Dave would be their only child. At age 7, after seeing his cousin play a guitar, Dave picked up a guitar himself for the first time. He discovered Elton John, Kiss, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Jimmy Page, Daniel Ash of Bauhaus, Robert Smith of The Cure, and Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine. He formed his first band at age 12, and in school, he joined the marching band where he met Stephen Perkins, who would later be the drummer in Jane's Addiction. But let's back up. In 1976, Mike and Connie got a divorce. Mike was always traveling, which created all sorts of tension at home. But as divorces go, it was pretty smooth. The two remained close, and from all reports, shared custody of Dave very, very well. Money was never a problem, so Dave didn't have to bother with part-time jobs, and that left him all kinds of time to spend with his guitar. Dave was very close to his mother. She used to read to him before bed for years. Pretty bonding thing. All his friends considered Connie to be the cool mom. No one was ever worried about having her around. It was, by all accounts, from family, friends, and neighbors, a pretty nice situation in that 2-story condo in Westwood. Free to date, now that she was divorced, Connie Navarro met John Dean Riccardi sometime around 1977. He also went by John Alexander Riccardi and a few other aliases. Dean was born in Brooklyn. He was a competitive bodybuilder starting in high school, and his passion for the sport is what brought him to California. For a while, things were just fine. although no one was clear where Dean got his money. It wasn't until later that everybody learned that he was a burglar and had a criminal record that included larceny. To those who met him, Dean had a scary edge to his personality. The man gave off weird vibes. And it got awkward when he began to spend most of his time at Connie's house instead of at his own apartment. He became extremely possessive and jealous of Connie. He would often show up unannounced in her office or condo to just check on her. Where were you? Who were you with? That kind of thing. Things really started to unravel in late 1982. Connie, of course, resented everything that was going on, so they began to fight more and more often. Then there was a breakup, and that did not go well from the moment Connie called it off. At first, Riccardi sent her letters and gifts, but then his attitude switched to, if I can't have you, then no one can. Riccardi would not leave Connie alone and began stalking her, harassing phone calls. He crashed outings with her friends. He started staring at her through the window as Connie worked out at her gym. When Riccardi saw her with a business partner named George Hoffer, he later threatened him, saying that he would break her knees if he didn't stop seeing Connie. In mid-January 1983, Riccardi broke into Connie's place and coerced her into sex. He messed with her car and then conveniently showed up to help when it wouldn't start. Dean used some of the skills he acquired breaking into houses to terrorize Connie. He'd break in just to show that he could. On January 31st, 1983, she changed the locks. Then came the security system, which proved ineffective. At around the same time, she discovered that the latch to the sliding glass door to her second-floor bedroom had been sawed almost all the way through. This is something that you could only do from inside the house. Riccardi had been in the condo, yet Riccardi boasted, "There are no locks to keep me out of your house." On another occasion, he showed up at a restaurant where Connie was having breakfast with a friend. He sat down uninvited and then just stared at her for 4 straight minutes. He eventually left without saying anything, except to hand gesture shooting her with a gun. There's also the time in mid-February 1983 that he removed her from a dinner with friends at gunpoint, insisting that she spend a weekend away with him. When Mike, her ex-husband, heard about that, he called it a kidnapping. Occasionally, she'd trade cars with friends and family in an attempt to throw Riccardi off her trail. There were lots of threats to go with the stalking, and this went on for several weeks. And it wasn't just Connie who was afraid. Riccardi creeped out the whole neighborhood. Everyone started changing their locks, and the whole area was warned to be on the lookout for this guy. Riccardi may have broken into a neighbor's condo to steal some keys that Connie left them for safekeeping. Then came a day in late February 1983. Like I said at the very beginning, Dave was homesick from school when Riccardi broke into the house again through the sliding doors, apparently looking for Connie. She wasn't there because she was out for her regular jog. At first, Dave hid in the bathroom behind the shower curtain. Then he called out to Riccardi asking if someone was trying to break in. Riccardi, obviously upset that he'd missed Connie, confronted Dave with a gun while sitting on Connie's bed. Riccardi became upset, saying that he planned to kill himself, but wanted to talk to Connie first. Dave, of course, was frightened out of his mind. Riccardi pointed the gun at Dave and then apologized. Then he produced a set of handcuffs, trapped him in the bathroom, and said he was off to wait for Connie to come home so he could talk to her. When she returned about a half hour later, there was a loud 30-minute argument. Dave heard Connie being slapped. Then Riccardi, a tearful mess, returned to the bathroom and removed the handcuffs and begged Dave not to tell his mother what had happened between them in the bedroom. Dave was so scared that he agreed. He wouldn't tell his part of the story until after the murders. Riccardi was obsessed. He would not go away. Connie was too afraid to stay in her own house. But when a friend tried to take her away for the weekend, there was Riccardi, surveilling things from across the street in his car. Connie tried to counter this with a letter she wrote on February 18, 1983. Let me quote, "I'm so sorry that you're still angry, and you feel a need for vengeance and punishment. You're accomplishing your goal. I feel like a walking dead person going through the motion of life, like a small wild animal who knows it's surrounded by a pack of wolves. The smallest sound or movement makes me jump. The sound of the phone is now frightening. Another hang-up. I'm so locked up in my own house, afraid of every sound the walls have probably always made. I walk out of my house, a coffee shop, a gym, looking for you. Terror. Until I get into my car and I know the doors are locked and I can breathe again until I can get out. Then it starts all over again. How long is this going to go on? Connie was so scared that on March 1st, 1983, she tried to get a restraining order against Riccardi. When he found out, it only made him angrier and more obsessed. On March 2nd, the day before the killings, Connie was again having breakfast with friends when Riccardi showed up looking sweaty and horrible and scary. The two of them moved to an empty table to talk, where the friends heard her accuse Riccardi of breaking into her condo and taking something. She then showed him the letter. He responded, "I could hurt you right here, and no one would do anything." Connie, shaken, returned to the condo, against Mike's advice. But to make sure Dave was okay, it was agreed that Dave would stay at Mike's place that Wednesday night. But then came the night of Thursday, March 3rd, 1983. Dave wasn't at the condo. Connie was home with her close friend Sue Jury. She was so tight with Dave that he considered her his aunt. Sue's daughter, 13-year-old Christy, was considered a cousin. Earlier in the evening, Riccardi met with an old girlfriend at a restaurant. He was nervous, agitated, and again very sweaty. They discussed Connie, and the ex told Riccardi that he needed to leave her alone. When they left the restaurant, Riccardi asked his ex to call Connie from a payphone. If a boy answered, she was to hang up. Well, no one answered. Riccardi responded, "That effing bitch Connie is not answering her phone." The ex walked with Riccardi to his car, and she thought she may have seen a gun in the trunk. They parted somewhere between 10 and 10:30. Connie's condo was just 4 miles away. When he arrived at the condo, Riccardi climbed up to the roof and found the skylight over Connie's ensuite bathroom. But because that seemed like an odd place for entry, later on that skylight was never dusted for prints. But anyway, Connie and Sue were downstairs drinking wine. When Riccardi saw Connie, they began arguing. Then he shot her twice in the chest with a .38 Colt handgun. Then it was Sue's turn. She was also shot twice, once through the thumb, probably a defensive wound, and a second time, the bullet went through the base of her hand, into her jaw, and severed the carotid artery and came out the back of her neck. This all went down sometime around 10:45 p.m. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots, and about 20 minutes later, they saw a large man leaving the condo and driving away in Connie's car. It wasn't until the next day that everybody found out what had happened. The first indication that something was wrong was when Connie failed to show up for an appointment. She'd missed a dinner date, something that she never did. Mike picked up Dave as scheduled from school and deposited him at his place. Once that was done, Mike went to Connie's condo to make sure everything was all right. But by this time, he had a bad feeling about everything. When he got there, he thought, strange, her car isn't parked out front. Maybe she's out somewhere. Mike had his own set of keys to Connie's condo, so he let himself in and called out for her. And that's when he found the bodies. There was blood everywhere. Connie's body was found dragged down a hall and half stuffed into a linen closet. It appears that she hadn't died from the bullets, so she was smothered with a pillow. Sue was discovered face down in Connie's bedroom. From the bloodstains on the carpet, it looks like she'd been dragged from Dave's bedroom. Nothing in the condo was missing except the keys to both Connie's and Sue's cars. They were later found 2 blocks away from the condo in opposite directions. It looks like Riccardi had found the keys in the women's purses, which he then stuffed into a closet. Mike immediately called the cops. When they arrived, Mike was hysterical, understandably. He was handcuffed on suspicion of being the murderer. Again, understandable since there was an ex-husband in a condo with 2 dead bodies, one of which was his ex-wife. He was soon released as other family and friends arrived and told cops about Riccardi. Fearing that Riccardi might go after Dave, a detective was dispatched with Mike to his house to make sure he was safe. Mike had to tell 15-year-old Dave what had happened. Immediately, Dave thought that had he been at the condo, Riccardi would have shot him too. The fact that he was alive was due to a change in that scheduling between Mom and Dad. The funerals were held about a week later. Connie had an open casket funeral and was interred at Westwood Memorial Park, the same cemetery as Marilyn Monroe. Connie was just 41. Everyone who knew Connie and Sue was beyond devastated, and perhaps no one more so than young Dave. Meanwhile, Riccardi had vanished, and what happened over the next 8 years is incredible. After Dean Riccardi shot Connie Navarro and Sue Jury on March 3, 1983, he tried to cover his tracks. He moved Connie's car a few blocks away to make it look like she wasn't home, discouraging anyone who might just want to drop in. He went back to his place in Santa Monica, packed up as much as he could, and then went on the lam. He left behind the apartment, everything inside, his motorcycle, and virtually everything else, including 3 handguns and 4 sets of handcuffs. An arrest warrant was issued. The shooting was big news in LA media. On May 2, 1983, an interstate flight warrant was issued by the FBI with a note that Riccardi had suicidal tendencies and vowed not to be taken alive. He was considered armed and very dangerous. But despite this all-points bulletin, cops and the FBI came up empty. Riccardi was crafty. Income came from burglaries, perhaps as many as 100, stretching in a line from New York to Miami and west to Texas. He also found work as a bartender, a food services manager, and a hairstylist. He started using more aliases like Jackie Riccardi, Rick Ricardo, George Samantino, and Emmanuel Shapiro. With some of his money, he got plastic surgery on his face. He sometimes wore glasses and occasionally dyed his hair black, and he had a couple of Social Security numbers. So, with little to go on, investigators turned to reality television. The story became a case for America's Most Wanted in January 1991, 8 years after the shootings.
We first got to know him as just Dave, a young man torn apart by his mother's brutal murder.
These 2 beautiful, innocent women were blown away by an egotistical guy. It wasn't anything but except his obsession, rejection, hurting his ego, and they're the victims. And he's out there. He's arrogant, he's vain, he's working the system. Nobody can catch him. What is wrong here?
Dave remembers watching that program, kind of freaked out at the recreations of the crime. It was odd watching an actor play 15-year-old him. We'll get back to that hunt for John Riccardi in a bit. Meanwhile, Dave Navarro was extremely messed up. Who gives a 15-year-old the tools to deal with the brutal death of a beloved mother? He had no framework about how to go on. He also felt extremely guilty for not telling anyone about the time Riccardi broke into the condo, and Dave had promised not to tell anyone after Riccardi got all teary-eyed and acting guilty with the handcuffs and the gun. In his book, Don't Try This at Home, Dave wrote this: "I feel guilty because before the guy killed my mother, he broke into my house at gunpoint and held me up and made me promise not to tell anybody, and I didn't. And a week later, he killed my mother. So I've always felt I could have prevented it." Dave had vivid dreams of his mom still being alive. He had nightmares of Riccardi coming back to get him. He developed trust issues. He became afraid of getting too deep into relationships, lest that person be taken away from him too. His father was a complete mess after the murders, and completely ill-equipped to help Dave, who veered into suicidal thoughts many times. So, he began to party. Very, very hard. Hey, look, if life could be over in a second, why not live it up while you can? He developed a very dark sense of humor as a coping mechanism, but he needed even more than that. Dave got very deep into self-harm, often cutting himself, and engaged in things approaching self-mutilation. He developed a fascination with blood, especially his own. He discovered extreme S&M practices that involved some body mutilation. And he got into drugs. A lot of drugs. He started with pot to kill the pain, but then heroin became his thing. Friends recall that as soon as one high evaporated, Dave tied off and shot at another hit. He became an expert at tying off. Guitar straps, mouse cords, the cord from a toaster, condoms. He once tied off his arm for a fix using the dreadlocks of Marilyn Manson guitarist Twiggy Ramirez. Strange people kept dropping into his house: junkies, strippers, dealers, hookers. He installed a photo booth, and if you were going to be in his house, you had to get your picture taken. He started covering his eyes with huge sunglasses so people couldn't see how wasted he was. He became suicidal, and he was always ODing. He went into rehab no fewer than 7 times, and for most of his adult life, he was in therapy. On the positive side, Dave got deeper and deeper into music after his mother died. In 1986, 3 years after the murders, Dave joined a new group called Jane's Addiction on the recommendation of drummer and high school buddy Stephen Perkins. The singer was Perry Farrell, a refugee from a gothy metal band called Psycom. He was having trouble finding a suitable guitarist for his new band and had gone through 4 other guys before Dave showed up. The group quickly became a sensation on the Sunset Strip, especially with their gigs at a club called Scream. An indie album, which was mostly recorded live at the Roxy Theater on January 26, 1987, was a big breakthrough for them. There were a few studio tweaks later. It was released on May 15, 1987, and featured an early version of this hit. A year after the Roxy performance, Jane's Addiction went into the studio to record their major label debut. Nothing shocking. But things immediately got weird. Farrell wanted the lion's share of the band's publishing rights. The group even broke up once or twice during the sessions because they would have none of Perry's crazy financial demands. They barely got the record done. But they did. And after swings opening for the Ramones and Iggy Pop, Jane's Addiction started to headline their own shows. A second album was started in mid-1989, but Dave, who was by this time considered to be one of alt-rock's freshest new guitarists, has almost no memory of making Ritual de lo Habitual because he was so deep into heroin at the time. There was a 13-month tour behind that record, starting in 1990, and it was a misery. No one in the band could stand each other, so it was decided that there would be one last road trip in the summer of 1991. And that was the first ever Lollapalooza Festival, which featured Susie and the Banshees, the Butthole Surfers, Rollins Band, Ice-T and Body Count, Living Colour, and 9 Inch Nails. Dave and Perry got into an onstage fight the very first night. How they managed to make it through 25 more shows was a miracle. A big problem was drugs. Dave was, by this time, trying to stay sober, but that's something that wouldn't stick until the late 1990s. There were a few more gigs after Lollapalooza, with the last show happening in Hawaii on October 26, 1991. Dave wasn't sure what to do next. He was invited to try out for Guns N' Roses 4 times, but each time he never showed up. He was probably worried that hanging with the Gunners would destroy his sobriety. There was a band called Deconstruction that recorded 1 album. Then he joined the Red Hot Chili Peppers as a replacement for John Frusciante in 1993, but that wasn't a good fit. Dave just didn't have the funk. He knew that, and there were too many drugs in the band. He lasted 1 album. And then there were a few one-off appearances. Did you know it's him playing guitar in this song?
It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you gave to me. You ought to know.
But let's back up. In all the time that Dave was with Jane's Addiction, Dean Riccardi was still out there. Dave was never sure if this guy was going to show up and finish the job. And if it wasn't for a detective named Ralph DeFonso, Riccardi may have never been caught. But he was. And the tip came from a very interesting place. Like I said earlier, murderer Dean Riccardi was very good at staying under the radar after he shot and killed the mother and friend of Jane's Addiction guitarist Dave Navarro. He disappeared for 8 solid years. This guy was a ghost. It wasn't until LA detective Ralph DeFonsi came up with a plan. It was known that Riccardi had some plastic surgery done on his face. He did not want to be recognized and ID'd, so DeFonso sent out a letter to every plastic surgeon in the country. Did they know this man? Did you work on him? And when? The case, like I said earlier, was also pitched to America's Most Wanted, a Fox TV show hosted by John Walsh. It was based on a German program known as File Reference X, Unsolved, and a British show called Crime Watch. The goal for Fox became to create a nationwide dragnet that would capture criminals who had so far evaded police. Walsh had signed on to be host because his 6-year-old son had been kidnapped and murdered in 1981. A made-for-TV movie called Adam appeared in 1983, and Walsh had become an advocate for missing and exploited children. Despite detractors, America's Most Wanted actually started finding bad guys within 4 days of its first broadcast on just 7 Fox affiliates across the country. This was February 1988. By 1991, it had expanded to more stations and ran 60 minutes instead of the original 30. Detective DeFonso pitched the Connie Navarro case, and America's Most Wanted took it. When the show aired in 1991, they got a tip. A California plastic surgeon phoned in, saying that he had performed a procedure on Riccardi on March 15, 1983, less than 2 weeks after the murders. When they finally found him in January 1991, he was living in Houston, living on the proceeds from burglaries. There was cash, jewelry, and other booty in the apartment. He was living with a partner named Samuel Sabatino, using a variety of aliases. He told Sabatino everything. The women were shot with either a .32 or .38 caliber pistol, which Riccardi then hid under some material on the roof of his apartment. His partner would later testify against Riccardi at his trial in hopes of skating on a couple of his own burglary charges. Turns out that Riccardi also owed Sabatino $100,000. We'd later learn that Riccardi had also confessed to his mother and father in March 1983, again, just weeks after the murders. And we'd also learn that Mom had plans of writing a book about the whole thing involving her son. Another round of plastic surgery about 2 years after the murders had shortened his nose and removed an identifying mole. And get this, when they raided the apartment, cops found a VHS tape of his America's Most Wanted episode in a briefcase, along with another pistol. He was taken into custody in Houston and almost escaped during a hearing. He kicked out a 10th floor window and stayed on the ledge for almost 12 hours, threatening to jump, but he was eventually convinced to come inside. Riccardi was transferred back to California and charged with 2 murders and burglary. When things finally moved to trial, there were some issues with jury selection that needed to be sorted out. He testified in his own defense, denying that he killed anyone. He even denied stalking Connie. Any contact before her death was completely coincidental, he said. His lawyers even argued that Riccardi couldn't get a fair trial because of all the attention generated by the O.J. Simpson situation, which was happening at the same time. However, the evidence against Dean Riccardi was overwhelming. Testimony came from Dave, Mike, Sue Jury's daughter, and a parade of friends and neighbors. In 1994, at the conclusion of the trial, the jury came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts after deliberating for just 8 hours. Dean Riccardi was sentenced to death, and he sat on death row until 2012, when the sentence was overturned on a jury technicality. At the time, he was one of the oldest prisoners on California's execution list. His sentence was converted to life in prison. For Dave, Mike, and everyone who knew Connie, it was the end of a long period of uncertainty. Riccardi was sent to prison to serve his sentence. Dave went on to have a successful career in music, television, and radio. There was another Jane's Addiction album, a couple of tours, a couple of breakups, and there were many other bands, including one with Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters. He did a lot of session work for people like Janet Jackson. He became a spokesman for PETA and for organizations in the area of mental health and mental illness. He also performed and organized a series of benefit concerts. Enduring relationships, however, proved to be a problem. He was married 4 times, including to actor Carmen Electra for 4 years. He acted in 4 episodes of Sons of Anarchy. He had a guest shot on Law & Order SUV, and he was a host and judge for the tattoo show Ink Master. And it was around that time he got a tattoo of Connie on his left ribcage by artist Kat Von D. And he managed porn star Sasha Grey and directed at least 1 porn film. Dave was sidelined for a couple of years with long COVID, which delayed another Jane's Addiction reunion and forced him to step away from Ink Masters. When that tour finally got going in 2024, these were the first performances by the original lineup in 15 years, all the old tensions flared. And on September 13th, 2024 in Boston, Dave and Perry got into another fight on stage mid-show that escalated backstage. The rest of the tour was canceled, and lawsuits were filed. But most germane to our story is a 2015 documentary called Morning Sun. It explored the murders, the trauma, and the fallout, and it culminates with Dave visiting Riccardi in San Quentin. That's not on film, the prison wouldn't allow it, but we do get to see Dave's reaction to what was a very emotional encounter. He faced down his mother's killer, whom he later described as an old dude dying in prison. The doc is very interesting and quite harrowing. It ends with Dave out in the desert. His forehead is cut open and his blood is collected. An artist then uses that blood to paint a portrait of Connie. It's quite something. If you have any questions or comments about anything you hear on this podcast, email me at alan@alancross.ca. We could also meet up on all the social media sites, along with my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com, which is updated daily with music news and recommendations. It also comes with a daily free newsletter filled with music news, opinion, and music recommendations. And then there's my other podcast, The Ongoing History of New Music, which deals with rock music and alternative music through the decades. And there are hundreds and hundreds of episodes that you can enjoy, all for free. See you next time for more stories of crime and mayhem in the music industry. Episodes arrive every 2 weeks. Technical productions by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.